in one way. So we have our first talk by Mike Bloomberg. His name is similar to the mayor of New York City, but he is a co-founder of Groundwork data and visiting researcher at Cornell Tech. And prior to this, he was a chief of staff at Mayor Alex Morse in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is right next to UMass. And his current work examines the cost and benefits of like a set of innovative strategies for undergrounding utilities lines in non-high density cities. And he completed his MBA in computer technology administration and management at Cornell Tech and BS in political science at UMass Amherst. I would invite him to share his screen and start his talk. I am really looking forward to his talk.
All right, what are we seeing for the screen? Everything look
You
good?
look good, yeah.
All right, it's great to meet everybody. Thanks for having me here. I will, I'll try to go through this so we get that 5-minute break at the end. As Noman mentioned, my name is Mike Bloomberg. I am not the former mayor of New York City or the billionaire person who ran for president. I'm a visiting researcher in the Urban Tech Hub at Cornell Tech. And as Noman mentioned, the co-founder of Groundwork Data. I've spent my career working at the intersection of city and academic partnerships. I've been on the city side, partnering with academics, including many at UMass Amherst. I've also worked in academia and partnered with cities. And most recently, I led the research and design of the Urban Tech Hub at Cornell Tech, which now has a 2-year master's program in urban technology. And we specialize in city academic partnerships, specifically with New York City, but also the connection between cities and technology around the world. I'm imagining this might take you all back to your undergrad English class days, but the hero's journey, which is a common template for telling stories. And I was thinking through this when I was thinking through the process of what it takes to be an academic, to start the process of working with a city. And I've replaced the hero up front with the academic, because of course we are all heroes. You are all heroes in your own right. But I think it works really well for telling the story of how these partnerships come together, how they can fail, and how they can be really successful. Especially this part down here titled "The Abyss." My goal for the short time today is to introduce you to some of the challenges you might encounter on your own journey when trying to work with city partners, how to prepare for them, and so you don't get stuck in that hole. I want to caveat that this is predominantly US centric, but as we're talking about city engagements, a lot of this should be relevant elsewhere around the world. I know a lot of folks are tuning in not from the States. And I've given this presentation before where I've broken this down into 4 categories of searching for partners, selecting and kickstarting your partnerships, working with them, and then delivering your results. But because we're a little bit limited on time, I'm going to really split it in half, which is the front end and the back end, really finding partners, getting started, and then working with them. Number one thing when you're thinking about working with a city is there's a real distinction you need to figure out up front, which is, are you looking to learn from and evaluate an existing process, or are you looking to test and implement something within a city? So are you conducting research on existing processes, or do you have a new process that you want to introduce? This is really important on the city side, and a word of caution is that there's a temptation to do both, to say, I want to conduct some research and then I want to come through after the fact and show you how my way is better. I really want to caution against this approach, mainly that city governments operate on very different timescales than academia. And for those of you who've gotten NSF grants, you might get a 3-year NSF proposal. Over that period of time, you might see a mayoral change, you might see a council change, you're certainly going to see staff change within city government. So as the elected officials go and the funding comes and goes, you don't want to overpromise and over-deliver. You don't want to do too much up front. I really think that if you overpromise and underdeliver, you're not only hurting yourself and your ability to work with the city, but you're making it more difficult to work with, for other academics to work with the city down the line. So you're not just out there representing yourself and your project, but all academic and city partnerships. So for this, one key thing is I highly recommend breaking up proposals either into focusing on the research or on implementation, and not both. The second thing you really want to drill down when partnering with cities is whether the city is the correct partner in the first place. I'm going to use some specific examples from the energy space here. You may think that a city is an ideal partner because you want to help people within a city. You might have heard that a city has issued a press release saying they're interested in energy transition, something related to your field. But the overlap, and this should come as a surprise to nobody, but the overlap between what cities and elected officials say is within their purview and what is actually in their purview is a lot smaller than you might think. So a specific example here is many of you might know that the city of Ithaca, New York, wants to be the first city to fully decarbonize their building stock. The residents have voted for this, 8,000 buildings, public and private, led by the mayor with the town council vote, and the town is moving ahead. They want to get this done by 2030. And so you might be thinking, well, is Ithaca a good partner for me in my project or initiative that is looking to work with a city interested in decarbonization? So an example where it might be is if you're looking to build a surveying tool where you want to work with homeowners to better understand their willingness to switch from gas to electric. But in an example where it might not be is if you're looking to evaluate the age of gas pipes and the gas usage at the individual homeowner level to see if it makes sense to decommission old gas infrastructure. Now, despite the city saying that they want to transition their buildings off of gas into electricity, that decision is ultimately, and that data is ultimately in the hands of the utility, the private utility. And so you always want to figure out who it is that has the data and information, and who governs that data and information that you're looking to partner with. And I'm going to be blunt, is that it's rarely actually the city. In fact, they might not have that data. Moving on to when the city is the right partner. So you've decided that you want to work with the city, you want to work with the city. You can avoid a lot of headaches down the line by being a little bit picky up front. I know there's a lot of grant applications, especially a lot of federal applications from the NSF coming out that really encourage or might even require city partners. Having the wrong city partner is going to prevent you from really doing anything. I think this is, to put it in more scientific terms, it's great to think of this as coupled optimization. You want to optimize for your ideal research criteria, but you also want to optimize for the relationship that you have. So an example is if you want to study the efficacy of air source heat pumps in a multi-unit apartment building in a cold climate, Orlando, Florida is not going to be on your list of partners, even if your best friend is the mayor of Orlando. But more nuanced, even in a cold weather climate, that doesn't make sense for climate reasons. But even if you have a cold climate like Wakefield, Massachusetts, it's not your ideal partner because they don't have the right number of multi-unit buildings, and they might have a utility that's uncooperative. So you really want to set that criteria really well up front. Obviously, this is going to be important in your own research later on. You can, to do a lot of this breakdown, I recommend a lot of the EIA data and census data. A mix of those two data sources can really help you figure out populations in cities, the type of building stock, the energy use, the utilities in the area. And so you can really create filters, and we do this all the time at Groundwork. We throw this data in Tableau and we say, hey, we're looking for a utility that services X number of customers with this type of population and demographics. And we're able to narrow it down to 40 or 50 and then splice from there. So that's taking the criteria approach. Coming from the other direction, the relationship is critical. Many universities, labs, and professors have long-standing relationships with cities and towns. If you're just coming up in academia, or if you're new to the city, the town, even the country, you should ask your colleagues first. I know academia can often feel and in practice be a very siloed place, but I can assure you it's not going to make for a good conversation when you reach out to a city asking to collaborate and they respond by saying something like, well, I'm already working with one of your colleagues, don't you know them? So I highly recommend reaching out to colleagues. When it comes to using this information, again, I think a lot of it's just like coupled optimization. You have your ideal criteria, you have the strength of your relationship. And I would rather work with a city partner that has a track record of supporting successful research efforts, but doesn't meet my ideal criteria, than one that meets all my ideal criteria, but the relationship is starting from scratch. If you need to start a relationship from scratch, you're going to end up spending just as much time focused on relationship management as you are on your research. So just know that. Coming down to see where this line hits from the known into the unknown section, there's a word there that says helper. Taking this to this type of relationship, the helper on the city side is who's going to be your champion on the city side. You're going to have someone that you are constantly communicating with, who is helping you understand this complex, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy. Just as it is very difficult for someone from outside of a university to come in and understand all the politics and processes and IRB and everything on the academic side, you need that on the city side. You're going to want to find this person. It's hard to find. They might not be the person you end up working with the most on the project, but they should be the person who is a representative in the department that's benefiting most from your research. So if you're focused on I don't know, intersections with the city's water system, this is probably going to be someone in the city's Department of Public Works. If you're looking at long-term planning, there are planning departments. If it's energy specific, sustainability or climate departments. Finding this person gets a little harder as the city gets bigger. So for example, in Holyoke, there's one person in charge of all climate, sustainability, conservation efforts. In New York, there are hundreds, potentially thousands in New York City who are working within the Sustainability Office, the Department of Environmental Protection, DPW, all across the board. Finding this person needn't be that difficult. You actually can, just like as if someone were to send an email to your department saying, I'm interested in X, can you point me to a researcher? It works the reverse way. I highly recommend sending a cold email to department heads or folks who look like they have a title that might be relevant to you. If you email someone in the right department, including the department head, they should be able to direct you to a person on the city side who can help. I recommend, one key recommendation here is consider working with smaller and medium-sized cities as opposed to a large city like New York. I advised some folks working with a startup who wanted to install curbside EV chargers. And they were having a hard time getting the permissions they needed to do this in New York City and figuring out where they could do this in New York City. I told them to call the folks in Pittsburgh, which is not exactly a small city. They have CMU, they've got a couple 100,000 people. Pittsburgh paid them to pilot in their city. And so when you start going out those outside of San Francisco, New York City, London, some of these large key cities, you're going to find city governments that are much more interested in cooperating and being seen as innovators and a lot less red tape. So especially if you're looking to deploy and implement something, you should be looking to consider smaller cities. A few more points on this side is you're going to have to help your helper on the city side. Public employees are overworked and underpaid, just like probably everybody on this call. And maybe we have some private sector partners who might not be. In reaching out to them, you're going to want to start with the details of your research, the type of data that you're needing. You don't want to just get them excited, but you also want to explain to them here's the research that I'm planning to do and why it's beneficial to them and their community. Because I assure you, they independently do not care about helping your research. That is not their job. And to ask them to work extra hours to support you and your research is just not something that they're going to respond to. So always come in with one of these city presentations, being able to answer how and why this is beneficial to the city. And it might not be beneficial to the city today, might not be beneficial to the city at all in terms of getting implementation. But if your research is going to help figure out something in the long run, they should be able to understand that and advocate for you. The last thing I'll say is negotiate your expectations up front. I can't tell you how many times I've been approached by an academic when I was in City Hall, and they provided us with this story about a novel solution, slick presentation, and the promise of funding. And then they asked me for half of my time per week, 3 meetings per week, and a whole load of data that doesn't exist. You might think that because a city is responsible for something that they have data on it. I assure you more often than not, they don't. This isn't the end all be all. And in many cases, you might be able to help cities in collecting the data that you need. But make sure you set those expectations up front so you're not catching them off guard and you're not end up setting up this entire research agenda that requires data that they don't have. I'm going to go through this one pretty quick, but let's make sure let's say you've secured a partnership with the city, and you have a great counterpart on the city side who's going to make introductions and get you what you need. Well, that's really just the beginning of the process. It doesn't really matter what the contract or agreement says. You're at the point of this journey where venturing out into essentially a dark and dangerous forest full of all sorts of creatures, aka other city employees, because there is no one within the city who has the keys to everything. They're always going to have to ask one of their colleagues to jump in and participate, whether it be a data request or sitting in on a meeting. Some city employees will give you what you need with no questions asked. Others might even want to help. So just make sure you're repeating what you're doing and why in the context of the city. And I highly recommend, to the extent that you can come in and be able to show somebody graphs, maps, any example that where you can demonstrate to someone visually, because they're not going to have a PhD. They're not going to be folks who are understanding what you mean when you're talking about p-values most of the time. And so coming in with something that is rooted in their community and their job and translatable, that's really helpful. This is really important because these people can also put up a lot of blockades. You can put in a data request from someone, and if they don't want to respond to it, they just won't. I worked on a major project with New York City in broadband. I put in a Freedom of Information Act request for a certain set of data and spoke directly to the department. I waited 10 months for that data, and I didn't ultimately get it from the city. I was able to get it by being appointed to the new mayor's transition team, which gave me the permissions to access it internally. So having those good relationships and being able to understand and have conversations with folks about the data you need up front is going to be really important. I say here that you're going to encounter dragons. On the city side, there's going to be people who say that what you're doing is wasting their time, that your research is dumb and pointless, that the way they do things is the way they've always been done and the way they should always be done. These people are not unique to city government. We know they exist in all industries. But just a word of advice is when you encounter this person, do not try to argue with someone on the city side who's been doing this job for 30 years and who's probably not going to get fired and probably not going to change their mind. Just listen to what they have to say, and even if what they're saying would completely halt your progress, my suggestion is really not to try to slay the dragon, so to speak. This is the opportunity where you really need to go back to that helper on the city side, because chances are there's a workaround, and that's really going to be one of the most important things you do. I mean, this is true even on the city side, being a city official, trying to get work done. There's always going to be folks who are in your way, some of whom you're really not going to be able to change your mind. A tip of advice for getting around these folks is or getting these folks to begrudgingly be on board is, this is frequently a time where you want to elevate the conversation within the city government. So if you're not working with a department head, this is a conversation to pull in a department head. If the person blocking you is a department head, this could be a conversation where you're actually going up to the mayor's office. Frankly, the higher up of a person you have in the bureaucracy who is able to ask and make these determinations for you, the easier you are going to have of a time getting around folks. So if you are working on a big research project, if there's a lot riding on it, $1.5 million from the NSF, or it's just a major project, lots of funding, you want to try to get on the schedule of the mayor's office or the department head relatively early on. I know this can be terrifying, but if you have been able to present even just once, and for a 2-year project, if you put in the effort to get the mayor excited, that's somebody who with a 30-second email or 30-second phone call can get rid of all of those dragons in just a minute, because ultimately it all boils back up to the top there. And a lot of these initiatives really get led by having someone in the mayor's office who's supportive of these efforts. So you get to the end of the journey, you got the data that you need, you run the experiment, you're starting to write your paper, the summary of your findings to fulfill your grant obligation. My last bit of advice is really to not leave the city out of this part. We know you're going to do well from publishing a paper, but the number one thing that is really going to keep those mayors engaged in participating in these projects and will help you with follow-on projects and follow-on funding is just a headline. They want to see the headline in, it doesn't, whether it be Nature or whether it be the local newspaper, that this mayor is innovative and partnering with academia to try to better their community. That's ultimately what they do and what their job is. And I will, despite even those dragons you encounter, the folks who are going to try to put up those roadblocks along the way, I will say from my experience in City Hall and now consulting and working with cities around the country, there really is a significantly high percentage of folks who are in this job because they care about improving their community. It's not the highest paying job in the world. It's an incredibly stressful job, but they're in there every day to try to see their community be improved. So come in with that mindset, understand what they're trying to do, and they will make your job a lot easier as a researcher. I'll stop there. That's it for now. I'm happy to answer any questions about partnering with small cities, big cities, tips, tricks, anything anybody needs. And also, I believe my contact information, if not, we'll make it available. And if anybody has any questions about partnering with cities, I'm happy to help.
Are there any questions?
I think people might want that break.
Yes, but I have one question. So based on our experience of working with Holyoke, it is very hard to get data from like you mentioned, like they may not even have access to it, or the utilities may be the like main source. So like how do you navigate like that part a little, if you can like say a bit more about it, like utilities versus governments, like there are privacy concerns, like for example, as you know, like we are looking at gas pipelines and some information, this may be um, secret or information that is not that cannot be made public. But are there any ways where we can de-anonymize the data or things like that, that but still make it available to the researcher, or some things of that sort, some technical solutions or de-anonymization and things like that, that remove the concern of the utilities and governments but still provide data to the researchers?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is especially for anybody doing energy research, the key thing that I think you'll constantly come up against is that the data you're actually looking for is not held by the city. It's not municipal data, it is utility data. There's very little data that is kept on the city side, usually like tax payments and or outstanding bills. Even what someone pays in property taxes is public data. And so on the city side, the challenge you're more likely going to find is not a security and privacy. It's just that they don't, it could be paper documents. It could be that they use an outside vendor who collects all the information, and that vendor is only giving the city what the city asks for. So they don't own the data, but could get it for you. And more or less, they likely just don't have those systems set up. On the utility side, there's 3 different types of utilities in the United States, right? About 75% of people are covered by investor-owned utilities. They're going to have pretty great data, but they're going to be pretty reluctant to share it. The other 26% is split between municipal utilities and co-ops. Co-ops have board members and leadership elected by their members. Municipal utilities can have elected board members or appointed board members. They're likely going to be more open to partnering, but they'll have less of the data security and they're unlikely to have a data science team, whereas there's only about 195 investor-owned utilities in the United States. Each of them will have a robust data team. So when working with the munis and the co-ops, I can't recommend enough looking for industry associations. At the state level, so in Massachusetts, MWEC represents about 25 municipal utilities. And so they're an organization who represents the interest of multiple member utilities. There are about 3 or 4 different national organizations that represent municipal utilities. Some of them offer grants. So electric co-ops and municipal utilities look to go to some of the parent organizations or go to one of the larger municipal utilities that's more likely to have a robust data science team. The relationship with an investor-owned utility is going to be harder to set up, but they're going to have a lot more practice and understanding with managing data. The best way to get them to support you is to show how what you're looking to do is probably going to help them make more money.
We have one more question from Abel. Abel, you can go ahead.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the talk. I have a question when we have what researchers can do when unforeseen events like the war happens and it affects the global logistics. For example, in Europe, they are asking for coal plants to be re-enabled because they planned because they want to plant to decarbonize the system, but because of the war, they have to re-enable it. How can researchers adapt to such situations like that?
I'll say that and Noman knows this because this is a bit of the work that we're doing here. A lot of our challenges with adapting to some of these problems come from the fact that we don't prepare for them because it's not with anybody's best business interest to prepare for them. I think that's always something to keep in mind from the research and academic standpoint. I won't compare it to the war in Europe, but there's a question right now happening in almost every state. Actually, it's happening around the world, and Zurich's having the conversation. The Germans are having a significant amount of conversation, which is our reliance on natural gas and the future of natural gas. There's a lot of great research that's just starting to come out on what it would take, what the impact on the electric system would be, the role of geothermal microdistricts and district heating in providing an alternative to gas. It should not have taken this long, and there should be a significant amount more funding available for this type of research because of the role that it plays in geopolitical stability. And I think it's just important to always, don't just ignore the fact that there's no funding program or nobody asking you to do this research. That part of our role as researchers is to surface these challenges, to be able to say, look, if something were to happen to the supply chain, the availability of lithium, right? What are our alternatives? And to incorporate that into our modeling for pre-existing proposals, but B, in the development of future proposals, that we're not just taking, that we're not just doing intake and incoming. If we're only conducting research on the things that the large investor-owned utilities, gas companies, coal plants are asking us to conduct research on, we'll never be able to produce, solid and interesting research to help us manage the situations where their business model is disrupted. So I think that's, my best answer is it's on us to constantly be pushing the politicians and decision makers to explore alternative research proposals beyond what the industry is funding.